In my last video, we looked into what I consider to be a hard foundation for my childhood nostalgia, and I felt oddly despondent towards it. It hit me that maybe a lot of things I adored from those days have simply passed me by and I can never truly go back to them. But then I remembered a certain other title that changed everything for me. Okay, who am I kidding with that remembered crap? I think about MGS3 almost every week. It is the most formative game I have ever played and still remains one of my favorites all these years later. Metal Gear Solid 3 made me into who I am and still shapes me to this day. So I'd like to invite you to experience the story of a patriot who died to save the world and the man who would come to destroy it. This is Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Released on November 17th, 2004, Metal Gear Solid 3 was one of the last games released in what can be considered the greatest year in gaming. For someone who didn't grow up around that time, it's really hard to impart how good 2004 actually was for video games. Let me just put this in perspective for you. 1 month before, we saw the release of Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door, a classic JRPG and one of the finest games I've ever played. 1 week before Snake Eater's release, the gaming world was shaken to its core with the groundbreaking release of Halo 2, the Xbox standard that moved 1 million consoles, and not 1 day before MGS3, Valve dropped Half-Life 2. I don't even need to intro that because it's fucking Half-Life 2. And you know what? Metal Gear Solid 3 still stands well above all of them as the greatest game from this year. I try not to exaggerate much when I make these videos, and sure, I get overly sentimental here and there, but I always want to give my opinion as accurately as possible. So believe me when I tell you that Metal Gear Solid 3 is one of the very few games that I consider to be absolutely perfect. MGS3 is so good, it disgusts me. It occupies so much space in my mind palace that I felt compelled to make an overly long video about it on my low-rent YouTube channel. So before I completely lose sight of what I was talking about, let me give you a brief history of myself and the Metal Gear franchise. Metal Gear begins its life in 1987 on the MSX as a 2D stealth action game, and for its time it was a complete revolution. After that, a few years pass and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake is released in Japan, and once again it knocks the 2D stealth genre, as limited as it was at the time, on its ass. While these games were successful in their home country, they didn't have the same crossover in the West, mostly due to Metal Gear receiving a compromised port in America on the NES, and just talking about it makes me feel asleep. So the entire 90s passed us by and we arrive in 1998, and what the world received was something that I don't think anyone at the time could have seen coming.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
No, not that. Are Monica Lewinsky jokes still in vogue? I don't know. But after a few years of getting used to 3D with titles like Mario 64 and Quake, Hideo Kojima, the helmsman of the cult franchise Metal Gear, decided to roll up to the party after a 4-year absence following the release of Policenauts to completely rock the foundation of the gaming landscape with Metal Gear Solid. It's really hard to over-exaggerate the amount of influence Metal Gear Solid had on not only game design as a whole, but the way we approach narrative in a third-person action game. Having fully directed in-engine cutscenes with top-of-the-line voice acting was simply unheard unheard of at the time, and the amount of control given to the player was absurd. Most games felt like you played them and that was it, but Metal Gear Solid was designed to play back with you. You have your moments everyone remembers, like using the cigarettes to detect laser tripwires, or the Psycho Mantis fight and how that blew minds back in the day, but then you have moments like the Vulcan Raven fight. Now, pardon me because I could do an entire video about how much I love this boss and how perfectly tuned it is to allow almost any approach while still remaining a challenging fight in its own right, but I'm getting sidetracked and we're already wasting time as is. After that bombshell release, Kojima firmly engraved his name on the forefront of gaming culture, and the world waited on bated breath for his inevitable follow-up. Finally, in 2001, he released his highly anticipated sequel, Metal Gear Solid 2: The Sons of Liberty, and the general response to it at the time was a resounding,
"What the hell is that?"
This is because MGS2 is a brainlet filter, and this was a very smooth brain era of the world, a world that was still listening to Crazy Town and Uncle Kracker. Nowadays, Metal Gear Solid 2 is considered to be one of the most fascinating games of all time, with how it approached its themes of revisionist history in the age of information, combined with the nature of surveillance states wrapped up in a narrative about free will, and the nature of identity in a society so hell-bent on stripping everyone of their individuality. If it's not clear by my summation, MGS2 is in my top 5 favorite games of all time and is in fact my favorite Metal Gear Solid game. As such, I don't want to go too much into it because I plan to devote an entire video to giving that game its own personal tongue bath, but needless to say, the vibes after MGS2 were really off. People didn't want whatever that was, even if what that was one of the greatest games ever made, but as an ascended zoomer, I forgive the ignorance of those who came before me and simply move on. See, people wanted Snake back. They wanted their gruff David Hayter baby boy once again. So Kojima said, okay, but only if you do it my way, and dropped Metal Gear Solid 3 an appropriate 3 years later. While the original release is kind of fucky, the Subsistence release, which came out in 2005, fixed any camera issues and gave us the definitive MGS3 experience. Now, that doesn't mean saying the original is bad, because again, it's fucking Metal Gear Solid 3, but if it had one issue, it was that there was no third-person camera that the game was really designed for. Beyond that, it's pretty much flawless. So now that we're caught up, what exactly did MGS3 do to change the game and define itself as the best in the franchise? Simply put, it didn't change much. It just improved and tuned everything previously available to such a perfect level that it feels like a completely different beast. The movement and feel of MGS3 is so perfectly adjusted to the standard the game has set for itself, so that every alert, every death, and every mistake is felt by the player, since it all falls on how well they can interact with the game on its terms. To talk about game design, I actually have to go into the story of Snake Eater, since the setting and gameplay are intrinsically linked. MGS3 takes place in 1964, 1 year after the Kennedy assassination, and follows the story of a CIA operative with the codename of Naked Snake. Snake is sent into the fictional Russian jungle of Selino-Yarsk to retrieve a Soviet scientist by the name of Sokolov from a fringe military group of the KGB known as GRU. This mission is known as the Virtuous mission and serves as our prologue and tutorial. It was also ripped completely wholesale by Dishonored. I really like Dishonored, but like, come on, it's Sokolov and you're kidnapping him. Do better, Arcane Studios, do better. So back on track, Snake dives deep in the jungle and the player is given a few pointers as to how the game will progress. The game takes place in the 60s, right? Right. Remember that super cool, super useful Soliton radar? Really nice, right? Yeah, it looks really cool. Fuck you. It's gone. It left with the kids and is never coming back. You get the sonar, who, while not the looker your old wife was, gives neck like a fucking charity.
Oops, you found me! Don't come any closer! You are a sneaky bunny. Holy schmoly!
MGS3 is a game made up of small touches like these that build off of a rock-solid foundation. Beyond this, the prologue teaches you the basics of climbing, hunting, survival, camouflage, and how best to approach stealth scenarios.
What about the sentries?
No one spotted me.
I see.
This is all wrapped up neatly in under 2 hours and serves to perfectly punctuate everything the game intends to do over the course of Operation Snake Eater. By the end of the prologue, it's revealed that your mentor and mother figure, the boss, has fully defected to the Soviet Union to join her elite group of soldiers known as the Cobra Unit, and thus she hands over a Davy Crockett mini-nuke to the power-mad Colonel Volgin, who promptly bombs his own country in an attempt to create a false flag operation and blame the Americans. Snake himself is left wounded and at death's door when the audience is taught the basics of healing grievous wounds, and from here is extracted and given his new assignment. He's to return to the jungles of Seleno Yarsk with orders to stop the completion and weaponization of the mysterious Shagohod, neutralize Volgan, and kill the boss. When I say this is one of the greatest onboarding moments in a game, I fully mean it. This is a perfect demonstration of the art of the hard sell, and serves not only as a perfect litmus test for if you'll enjoy what Snake Eater has to offer, but also is a perfect thematic opener for the story that is about to unfold. MGS2's tanker mission is another great example of this, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't prefer just how fluid and unobtrusive Virtuous mission is. I feel like fluidity is the name of the game when discussing Metal Gear Solid 3 and how it actually plays. It's definitely stiff to move around and shoot, but the loop itself has this innate sense of flow. Everything you do feels purposeful, and you can put as much or as little thought into what you're doing, and the game will react to you and in some cases play back. Everything is to the point and there is little fluff to be found. You as a player grow with Snake over this journey and become familiar with the locales at the same points he does. As famous as Kojima is for his droning cutscene length, I never felt like any in this game drag. Every cutscene we get serves one of three purposes. They're either an important story beat, a piece of character building, or they're just flat out fun. Metal Gear Solid always had this air of build up to its cutscenes. Every character gets this cool name tag and introduction, they're always talked up to the nth degree, and while MGS3 serves to be the origin for one of the most legendary characters in the franchise, it takes such a matter-of-fact approach to its characters and how it presents them. Everyone in this game has their fair share of goofy moments, and it all serves to show that these are still people through and through. Characters like Ocelot, who in later games in the timeline is a fearsome trickster entity, is basically a level 5 in the grand scheme of things, and Snake goes out of his way to put him in his place every single time. Even Snake himself, the supposed man who sold the world, is portrayed as a fucking weirdo. Just certain lines like "get in the box, then you'll understand," or when he almost nuts over seeing a cool pistol, or when Eva first gets introduced and he just stares down her chest like he found Waldo in between her cleavage. It all comes back to taking the myth out of these people and bringing them back down to earth. That is, except for one. Before I discuss anything further relating to our characters, I think I want to talk about the bosses because it'll help me better explain my thoughts on our cast. MGS3 has the best bosses of the franchise, plain and simple. While I think fights like Vulcan Raven, Sawdust Snake, and Laughing Octopus are standouts and deserve the praise fans give them, nothing compares to the Cobra unit. I think as individual characters, I actually prefer Dead Cell, but as a total package, it's hard to deny the raw force of personality the Cobras bring to the table. Starting from the top and going down the list, the Pain is probably the worst of the five and has the worst boss fight, since you don't get that freedom of play that I mentioned earlier, and basically can only stand on this one rock and pray to John Romero, patron saint of shotguns, and have your prayers answered as you boomstick his B-bombs. And you know, saying B-bomb in a video I'm probably gonna cry recording is really jarring and off-putting for me. Next up is the Fear, and I quite enjoy his fight. I'm a fucking freak who almost never grabs the night vision or thermal goggles, so I just end up doing this fight by noticing the warbling of textures in the distance and shooting like I was protecting my land from the government in the inevitable martial law incident of 2029. If this comes true, I'm gonna feel like such a fucking asshole. The Fear is a good place to bring up the stamina mechanic. Like in MGS2, you have the option to take bosses down with lethal and non-lethal means. In MGS2, this meant that you can shoot them with a gun, or you can shoot them with a baby gun for babies because you are a big baby and don't want to kill Uwu Fatman Chan, but MGS3 actually offers the means to approach the game for a complete no-kill run, and it's quite a satisfying challenge. Not only is your tranq pistol a fairly useful weapon with decent range, and if you're skilled at aiming, it becomes a decently efficient way of taking out enemies, but you also have the CQC system, which allows you to physically take out enemies with either your bare hands or with melee attacks using certain guns. CQC also allows you to perform maneuvers where you can take an enemy hostage to avoid calling further alerts from other guards, or use your victim as a shield, or even just shake him down for some goods. Also, unlike MGS2, stamina is now a two-way street. You yourself have a stamina meter that you need to keep in check because letting it drop will bring about a multitude of negative status effects, such as shakier aim, a growling stomach that can alert guards to your position, or in some horrible cases, the sniffles. You're able to eat random animals you hunt in the wild, or your blessed calorie mate, to refill your gauge, which not only will prevent any of the above listed drawbacks from happening, but will also slowly refill your health bar free of charge. But low unto the bad Snake Eater player who left their game for more than a few days, because if you come back and try to eat that once tasty rat flesh, it will have gone bad, and now your tum-tum is sad. But fear not, if you are a big-brained, big-cocked, and/or clitted gamer guy or grill, you will use this knowledge to bait out the fear into eating rotted garbage like the garbage man he is. This is actually a super cool mechanic, and I really love its inclusion because it makes things that you'd expect to only negatively impact you work in your favor, which allows a player familiar with the game's systems and rules to turn it back and use it to their advantage. MGS3 is a game based around the rules of survival, and of those is the simple rule of use every part of the buffalo. Even tools you think are useless probably have at least one or two proper applications. I've played Snake Eater at least once a year every year since 2013, and I still haven't found everything this game has to offer. Half of the reason is because I am a stubborn baby, but the other half is a testament to how layered a game Snake Eater truly is. No other boss is a better example to prove this than the end. Now, this is the part where I feel kind of silly for doing this video because, simply put, it's the end. Let me repeat that for those who aren't quite picking up what I'm putting down. It's the end. Now, for all intents and purposes, the boss is my favorite fight in the entire franchise for a myriad of reasons I will explain later, but if you ask me what the best boss in the series is, I would call you stupid for wasting my time, because both you and I know it's the end. The end is one of those once-in-a-generation bosses that comes along and everyone pays attention to it because of how disgustingly good it is. For the 7th gen, it was Mr. Freeze, for the 8th gen, it was Gurman, and for the 6th gen, it was the end. I feel like this boss is the best talking point as to why MGS3 is unambiguously a masterpiece. Not only does he have the best build-up of any member of the Cobra unit, he also lives up to the hype in every way. There are so many different approaches to this fight, and all of them feel so natural for Snake to do. Nothing feels like I made my character do this because I, the player, want to. No, instead, everything feels like a choice this character would logically make with or without my input, since at this point in the game, he and I are the same person and we think the same way. You can approach this fight as the proper, drawn-out sniper duel that it was designed to be, which is thematically appropriate, or you can take cheap shots at him when he's shifting positions, or you can just let him die of old age if you're a fucking pussy, or you could apply my method, aka the enlightened path, in which you don't use thermal goggles, you run around until you notice subtle indentations in the ground where the end was walking, and you follow them until you run up on this old man with the fucking shotgun. Yeah, don't worry about it, I got my piece right here, old timer. You better cash in the AARP check before I cash out the fucking slug in your bald dome piece. This game does things to me, if you couldn't already tell. But how fascinating is it that there are so many more approaches to this fight that I didn't even think were possible, and yet are all about as viable as each other. That is the hallmark of a fucking fantastic amount of thought and effort put into every aspect of your game. Having these little bits and pieces are what make returning to Snake Eater on a yearly basis so rewarding for me. It also makes fights like the Fury go by slightly smoother, since I can attempt to try something new and fun before returning to the well of just blowing him up. The Fury is cool, don't get me wrong, but anything and everything looks like a mess when it's following up the end. I really don't have much to say beyond, yeah, he's cool. The Fury is kind of this sacrificial lamb in boss fight quality because it really reinforces how good the end was, and also sets up how the sorrow just makes me feel things. The sorrow is another really special fight because it's not a boss fight. Boss fights are supposed to be the high peaks that are spaced out by the valleys of normal gameplay, but the sorrow serves as either a reprieve from all the fighting or a further extension of the player's suffering. Regardless of what it is, what remains true is that it serves as a perfect reflection of how you, the player, have approached this journey thus far. Unlike games of the 7th gen that discourage killing by implementing a morality gauge to track how many no-nos you can commit before being permanently put on the bad boys list, MGS3 already knows how you're going to turn out. Remember, this game is a prequel. We're playing as the bad guy. Regardless of how many or how little we actually kill, the truth is only one of those deaths actually matter in the long term. Bosses like the End and the Fury don't matter down the road because once they're dead, they're gone. But like the sorrow does to the boss, all of those lives do weigh on Naked Snake. He remembers the piles of bodies he placed to get where he is, but to Big Boss, the only body that matters is the joy. As I mentioned earlier, every character has their humbling moments. That is, except for the boss. She's treated as this otherworldly entity among the cast. She is seemingly all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-powerful. In the presence of men and women, she is a goddess. This is because of the perspective that we see the story from. Snake Eater is told from the POV of Naked Snake, a tough-as-nails soldier, hardened by training and battle who's fazed by nothing. Nothing except his master. The boss is a god to Snake. Everything she does is so mystical in his eyes. She isn't something like him. This reverence is felt through every second she is on screen. From her introduction on the radio to her boss fight at the end, she's shown to be something transcendent. As I've already said, the boss is genuinely one of my favorite final bosses ever. She is completely different from everything in the game leading up to this point. Like how the sorrow spits in the face of what a boss can and should be, the boss spits in the face of what a final boss should entail. She's not a final test for everything the player has learned leading up to her. She is, however, a final test for everything Snake as a character has learned up until this point. She is representative of the final piece of humanity that Snake must forsake in order to become what we all know him to be. Unlike the other fights, it's not some duel in a canyon, or a battle in the jungle, or a brawl in an industrial complex. It's instead a fight amongst a beautiful field of white petals. It's not a war of two enemies, it's an argument held between family. The boss is a painful fight because she requires you to get up close and personal. You need to look her in the eyes to beat her. Every punch you throw and toss you make breaks my heart a little more each time because I already know how this story ends. We all do, and yet we're powerless to avoid it. And thus, I have to talk about the big one. Big Boss is my favorite character ever. There are no qualifiers to that statement. He's not just my favorite video game character or my favorite protagonist, he is simply just my favorite character ever written. Big Boss is so endlessly fascinating in every game he appears in, but especially in MGS3. When you take a step back and look at how tall of an order it is to transform this Sean Connery looking Saturday morning cartoon villain into a sympathetic and tragic figure, it becomes even more impressive that Metal Gear Solid 3 pulled it off perfectly. Naked Snake begins this game as a starry-eyed Joker who's willing to take on the world and ends it a broken man. The way this game portrays the voyage between these two different points in his life is absolutely masterful. Each step on his journey cracks a little bit more of that shell and picks away at his mind. Not only is he changed mentally from this, but physically as well, losing an eye in the process. He will never be the same, and for the rest of the series, he never is. The reason I spent a good chunk of this video talking about the Cobra unit was because of their significance to Snake himself. It's widely known that the Cobras are named after what emotion they carry onto the battlefield, but they also have another meaning to their titles. Each boss you kill along the way is Snake working up the courage to finish the mission. First by eliminating the pain in his heart, then by throwing away the fear in his mind. Next he sidesteps his thoughts of ending it all, then packing away his fury at the situation he was put in, followed by eschewing the sorrow he carries because of the task he was handed down, and then finally he is forced to snuff out the last piece of joy he has. Without joy, he allows all the previously defeated Cobras to wash over him, and the force of the impact is too great, and thus he shatters. Big Boss is a Greek tragedy to say the least. He was a good man who went off to do a brave deed and save the world, and so he was sent to do the right thing but for the wrong reasons, and now he spends the rest of his days doing the wrong thing for the right reason. Remember how I said that Snake looked up to the boss as a goddess? Well, like most godly entities, we don't understand what they want from us. This misinterpretation of what the boss wanted from Snake set in stone the domino effect that causes the rest of the series to occur. What's even more tragic is, unlike your Solid Snakes or your Raidens, Big Boss wasn't bred for combat. He chose this life of his own free will and followed his mentor like a parental figure because he wanted to. It gave him direction and allowed him to excel at what he does. Beneath his battle-hardened shell is a beating heart. He's still just a normal human being. He talks about movies with his friends, he has his weird quirks, and these little slivers of humanity are sprinkled throughout the rest of the game he's the lead in to remind us that somewhere in there is the Naked Snake we know still has the potential to save the world, but he's trapped beneath the skin of a demon. No matter who tries to help him, there's just no way to fix the heart of a little boy who just misses his mom. MGS3 starts a trend that's capitalized on in 5, which is letting Big Boss's cohorts and antagonists flesh out his character. I guess the best place to start is with his support team, and god fucking damn, this is the best Metal Gear Solid support team hands down. Every member is a standout, and they all have incredibly vivid personalities backed up by fun and bouncy dialogue.
Snake, what's up? Why are you naked? I know there's a naked option under uniform that lets you take off the upper part of your uniform, but without a shirt on, your camouflage sucks, and your stamina goes down faster. You don't get any advantages whatsoever.
Sure there are.
Like what?
It feels good.
Man, you do whatever you want.
I will, thanks. Just one question, though.
What?
Is there a way to take off my pants?
Say what?
My pants, can I?
Oh, hell no! This Fox unit is a nut fest.
Like Snake, they all have their individual quirks and weird tics that sell the idea that these are real people to the audience. My personal favorite is probably Paramedic, but I feel like anybody can make a solid case for anyone on this team because they're all just so gosh darn lovable. Lovability and memorability is a common trend that underlines almost every allied cast member in this game. Eva is another character who wormed her way into the hearts of MGS fans because she is hands down the best Metal Gear girl to date. In the same vein as Meryl, Emma, Paz, Meryl again, and
When will you learn? When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
Quiet. Ava is honestly in a class of her own. I feel like all of the above mentioned characters serve as sort of a way to approach our protagonist in a fashion that no other cast member can. In Meryl's case, she basically exists to go, "Wow, Snake Sugoi!" and is more or less a trophy to be won, which is bullshit because we all know Solid Snake's one true love is Otacon, and somehow leaving with him is the bad ending. Sure, MGS1, sure, but will Meryl help me raise my adoptive daughter in a gay, sexless marriage down the road? Didn't fucking think so. The only Metal Gear girl I feel that even compares to Ava is Emma, but in the opposite way. Emma is more so a reflection of how fragile Raiden can be at points and serves to be an extension of his character. Meanwhile, Ava is meant to be a challenge to Naked Snake throughout his mission. She serves as an ally who wants to see the best out of Snake, and in a game where everyone in the field is out to get him, it's comforting to find someone who holds their own against him and doesn't immediately cave to the legend because there is no legend yet. Ava stands head and shoulders above the rest in the crowd because she gets to be a love interest, a confidant, and a rival all in one. Beyond that, she's just a rock solid and well written character, which is something that can be said of most of the cast, including those on the other side of the battlefield. This brings me to the opposite of lovable, which is the villains. Now, I've already discussed the Cobras, who kind of just live the gimmicks and they're more so just the fights themselves, but when it comes to our other antagonists, they really do live up to being more than just a fight. That's because Metal Gear Solid 3 is a good game. Now, as our principal rival character, Ocelot is at his best in this game both in and out of context. If this was your first Metal Gear Solid game, Ocelot comes off as a snide little shitheel who you see and just immediately want to pull his colon out through his throat. Yet, as you go through the game, you form an almost begrudging respect for him as he does the same for you, and this caps off in a final duel you partake in during your escape from the field. This fight is emblematic of how much this mission has forever changed not only Snake's life, but everyone around him, as Ocelot is much more vicious, but also a less cocky version of himself. He is 100% devoted to finishing his mission no matter what, which is something he probably picked up from fighting Snake. However, if you're a veteran MGS fan, this Ocelot is basically one big inside joke. Throughout the plots of MGS 1 and 2, Ocelot is this character treated with a strange amount of reverence. Sure, he's fucking ridiculous, but the game is always nudging you saying that he's somewhat of a big threat, and you as a new player to the franchise have no real choice but to go, well, shit damn, I guess so. But after two previous encounters with him, by the time you hit MGS 3, you're expecting an Ocelot who's always ahead of the game, but he's kind of not. At least, not until the very, very end. It's pretty funny to have scenes where Naked Snake just talks mad shit about how everything Ocelot does is whack as hell and he needs to get good. It creates this weird meta joke that forces you to examine how, despite living in a world of gimmick boss fights and characters, Naked Snake remains a pretty normal dude with no frills. Speaking of gimmicks, I guess this is as good as time as any to talk about Volgin. Now, Colonel Volgin is one of the very few things in this game that I think is only just okay. Like, I don't think he's a bad villain, but he's definitely one of the weakest in the series. I barely count him as the antagonist of this game, but if I did, here's how he'd rank against the others in the franchise. Again, it's not that he's out and out bad, it's just in a game with one of the most dynamic and morally gray villains in the franchise, he serves as the average black and white supervillain you would expect to fight at the end of a video game. I feel like there is basically no good reason for Volgin to be evil. This isn't me going, I need all my antagonists to explain why they're evil to me because I need to relate to every character, but instead I see it as a bit of a missed opportunity in a game that is so meticulous about the hows and whys of motive for its characters' agencies. Despite this, I still hold Volgin as a perfect example of how to write a flat character well, because Volgin is not Hamlet, he's Nikolai Volkov. He isn't meant for the audience to question the nature of morality in war and challenge our approaches to a hero-villain dynamic. He's meant to be a road bump on the way to our main event. I find it a sad testament to his character that he's more interesting in his appearance in MGS5 than he is in 3. I say sad because even there, the only way I can really describe the man on fire is disappointing, so I guess that really sums up how I feel about him. As Volgan is the personification of the Forever War, the Sorrow represents those who have sadly had to live through and survive said war. The Sorrow is probably the only Cobra I'd give any more testament to their character, because I feel like there's a lot to him. He doesn't say much or honestly hold that much influence over the story, but as a long-lasting memory, he becomes one of the most important concepts introduced by Snake Eater. See, the Sorrow is the embodiment of trauma inflicted by the requests of those at the forefront of the war. What war exactly? Well, that's the point. There is only one war and it never ends. Wars are fought on different continents, but as long as one soldier lives on, they'll always be fighting the same war in their heads, and the things they did abroad or at home will never leave them. It will never let them sleep. Regardless of what joys they find in civilian life, there is always a ghost of sorrow haunting them until they die. This brings me to the most obvious foil in MGS3, the boss. I've already spoken a fair bit about the boss, but I think it's important to talk more about her here because frankly she's the linchpin of the entire franchise. She is the personification of parental deification and intergenerational trauma, and is the sole point of conflict for Snake. See, if we remove her from the mission entirely, MGS3 has a very boring and morally black and white narrative. But her inclusion and the immediacy in which she is relevant to Snake makes us the player wholly invested, because we have been told for upwards to 4 games about the legend of Big Boss, and here we are as Big Boss fighting his version of Big Boss. It's quite momentous when you think about it, but if you remember what I said about how MGS3 is a game hellbent on destroying myths, the boss is merely another victim. Snake Eater excels at imparting that incredibly disquieting feeling of realizing your parents are only human. No better nor worse than you are, simply human and nothing more. Which makes the endgame reveal that the boss never betrayed America and had Snake kill her to keep her cover even more tragic, because regardless if Kojima wanted to view these myths as people, Snake still believes wholeheartedly in the legend of the boss. This betrayal extends beyond familial relationships, and Snake takes it as a slight from his own government that he sacrificed his life for. This extends to how children, especially American children, become disillusioned with the nature of their own government. We've been raised from a young age to believe in God, government, and liberty as the 3 pillars to a free world, when in fact these concepts build walls that alienate us from those supposed freedoms. Like with the boss, the government is not an all-powerful, benevolent force bound by law to ensure justice. It's merely a collection of human bodies that we passively agree to let rule us. MGS3 is a critique of the American way and how we as a nation approach concepts like freedom, choice, and the pursuit of happiness is incredibly striking, and something that, like all good art, only becomes more true with age. On a daily basis, we see cracks in the foundation of our country, and the weight of this becomes more and more suffocating as the days go by. The illusion of one more war is part of the American DNA at this point. We fought for our independence twice, fought our brothers over if it was morally correct to recognize others as human, we fought for land, for power, for the world twice over, and what did those wars get us? Decades of living on a nuclear knife's edge because the American ego is an untamable monster. The fact MGS3 is set during the Cold War is very telling because it's a war that wasn't fought per se, but had more stakes than almost any other conflict. In a post-Hitler world, we should have united under the banner of peace and justice for all, but like Snake tells us in the intro, instead of locking arms against the evils of totalitarianism, fascism, and the absurdity of national creed, we selfishly split the world in 2. It's easy to see what Big Boss eventually goes on to become and sympathize, because when you examine everything he's been through, the battles he's fought, the things he's lost, and realize that the peace he's brought will only be temporary, yeah, it's pretty easy to understand why he would go rogue and become the thing he fought to end, since at the end of the day, what he was fighting for was a lie, so the opposite must be the truth. Don't let the sympathy carry you though, because Big Boss is still the bad guy. He's just less so Dick Dastardly, but instead Metal Gear's equivalent to Sisyphus. Due to a sin of his past, he's bound by forces greater than himself to repeat the same fruitless task ad infinitum, because that is his role in life. There is no escape for him. All that's there is a boulder he must push until it inevitably comes crashing down. Unlike King Sisyphus, however, the task Big Boss burdens himself with is not solely his punishment, but a punishment for the world. He takes the pain and anguish handed down to him and disseminates it through every nation. Big Boss is a continuation of intergenerational trauma, one that would come to an end at the hands of Solid Snake, which is a discussion for another time. It's very easy to analyze Big Boss as a man who had just one bad day, but he isn't immediately a turncoat monster after the events of Snake Eater. In Portable Ops, Peace Walker, and even MGS5, there is some semblance that he's trying to do what he sees as the right thing, but in the end he can't help but cave to his darkest impulses. This is because these games are equally important to his eventual transformation into the monster players were introduced to back in 1987, and as much as the framing of Snake Eater would like to point fingers at and utilize the death of the boss as the smoking gun as to why Big Boss is the way he is, this is patently untrue. It's a very big reason, don't get me wrong, but it isn't the reason. Why, you ask? Because there is no reason. Like I keep hammering in, Big Boss is a human being, and like a human being, he's not defined by a single event, but a million little tragedies that scarred him. Can you think back to one moment in your life that defines you? I bet you can. We all like to attribute our life trajectory to one split second in our existence, but it's highly unlikely that's the only cause. Each day shapes us a little more and molds us into something that we may not even recognize until it's too late. The one bad day mentality is how we cheat and write our villains to be more sympathetic. Well, you know, they were super nice, but they just lost it all and now they're evil. MGS3 seems to try and ape this, but it knows that we're smart enough to know that's not how people act, because the transformation of Big Boss isn't a dramatic revelation, but a fact of life. Snake Eater abuses our knowledge of the future of this character to utilize him as a gestalt of sorts. The mannerisms of Big Boss at the end of the game are despondent and almost robotic. In context, it's because he's been through a greatly traumatic experience and is ineffectively coping. But to a player who knows what Big Boss becomes, they are the germinations of a villain. This is because we're filling in the blanks with events that haven't even happened yet. One of the more important details I feel gets somewhat overlooked at the end of MGS3 is how it differs from the other endings in the series, especially the two leading up to it. At the end of MGS1, Snake leaves Shadow Moses with either Meryl or Otacon. In MGS2, Raiden leaves with Solid Snake. So who's with Big Boss at the end of MGS3? That's right, nobody. In the time he needs it more than ever, the most he gets is a message from Ava telling him the truth about his mission. But physically, he's alone in a graveyard, surrounded by death and confronted by just another life he took on his way to get there. This frames his mission in an incredibly harrowing way. Snake and Raiden can always find someone who understands them and can help them move on, but only one person can understand what Big Boss has been through, and they're currently 6 feet under. The final salute followed by Way to Fall still remains as one of the most emotionally potent things I've ever experienced in a game. No matter how many times I beat MGS3, I'm reduced to a tiny little puddle of tears when that hand goes up. It is the perfect amalgamation of the past and future of this franchise boiled down into one infinitely powerful image. Everything I love and adore in Metal Gear Solid can be found in this incredibly brief moment, and I feel like I speak for many others when I say that. That's something I find so incredibly special about MGS3 and Metal Gear as a franchise. In my last video, I talked about games like RE4 where everything and anything has been said, so talking about them is somewhat redundant. Well, despite being one of the most celebrated and lauded games of the 6th generation, I feel like there's still a fair amount left unsaid about MGS3 and its influences. I do not exaggerate when I say MGS3 fundamentally changed my outlook as to what gaming as a medium could achieve. This perspective shift led me down a path that brought me to where I am today, and I look back on my time with MGS3 in my youth as incredibly formative. Without MGS3, there's a good chance I would never have started making videos because it's a game that just demands to be talked about. The entire Metal Gear franchise, likewise, is equally demanding of its audience, and I fully intend to cover at least 2 other entries on this channel, so please look forward to those eventual videos. As for now, I think it's high time that we wrap things up here and give our final thoughts on this adventure. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is many things. A generation-defining title, an emotionally resonant tragedy, a finely tuned masterclass of the craft, and so much more. But above everything else, Snake Eater is a statement of intent by its creators. Like any good piece of art should, MGS3 strives to engage its audience on both its and their terms. Snake Eater may mean one thing to its authors, but it has been transformed into a touchstone for millions of people across the world like myself to indulge and reflect on it and put out videos and think pieces such as this one, and to that I remain eternally grateful. Unlike the disappointment I felt revisiting Birth by Sleep, I can safely say the opposite was felt upon my return to Selenoyarsk. Every time I come back to Snake Eater, it somehow manages to dig itself a little bit more into my being, and I just can never seem to get it off my mind. I think a good way of describing it is that Snake Eater haunts me. Not in a negative way, but as many games and experiences as I've had since first completing MGS3, it somehow manages to always worm its way back into my conversations and doesn't ever truly leave me alone. Playing Snake Eater is such a moving experience at a young age because up until that point, you're used to saving the world and being the good guy. But by doing what you're supposed to do, you end up doing infinitely more harm than good in the long run. Something about being unable to avoid that fate is so powerful and serves the narrative Snake Eater strives to tell so incredibly well. Because as much as we, the audience, would like to save this character that we love from being what he will inevitably become, we are powerless to avoid handing him the bricks he will eventually use to build the wall around his soul. With each edition, his heart becomes more and more scarred by years of betrayal and abuse as he becomes more inhuman and monstrous. But regardless of any fortification he puts around it, Big Boss will always be hurt deeply by a single phrase that he's etched on that broken heart of his. In memory of a patriot who saved the world. Because he knows that he can never be that true patriot he loves so dearly. He can never be the hero she wanted him to be. He can only be the man who sold the world, and the devil who sought to destroy it. And that simple tragedy breeds all the sympathy in the world.
You better wait to fall. They'll tell you where to go, but they won't know.
My name is Michael. Let's talk again soon. Hi, whoa, hey, this is Michael speaking. I normally don't do this because I feel like it breaks the flow of the anime videos when I like to end it off on a good note, but I've put a lot of work into this MGS3 video, and this video means a lot to me, so if you enjoyed it and got this far, give it a like, give it a comment, tell me what you thought about it, please send it around to people. Also in the description, links to my Twitter and my editor Pat's Twitter. It greatly appreciate it if you would follow us there. And I started streaming a little bit more regularly on Twitch. It's a fucking dumpster fire, but also I've started linking that in the description below too. So again, if you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, and send it around to your friends. Thank you.